First speaker today is Ben Greisler, who will be presenting on when zero-touch deployment isn't and when it should and shouldn't be. Hello, Ben. How are you?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Great. If you'd like to go ahead and share your slides, we'll go ahead and get started.
All right. So let's see. There we go. Play. Well, it's probably
There, I see something. There we go. I'll go ahead and set these live, and you are ready to go.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So first off, I'm sorry about the busy background. I expected to be in a different room that have kind of a clearer thing, and I wouldn't have to do the fuzzy stuff in the background. So I hope that's not too much of a distraction. But I thank the Penn State MacAdmins admins and everybody that's involved with it for once again giving me the opportunity to speak, but also to be putting on this incredible program that we've had for years and years and years. So thank you, everybody. So moving on. So why am I doing this presentation about zero touch? I mean, zero touch has been something that we've been striving for a long time, but I do a lot of work with a lot of different clients. You know, I don't work for just one customer. I don't, you know, I'm not working for a company. I'm not working for a school district. So I get to see a lot of different environments, and I really have bought into the concept of zero touch as a process when we're dealing with deployment of devices, and really try to work towards it. Sometimes I don't have full control over environments because I am a consultant that comes in to help with the companies, and a lot of times I do have to work with what we have. But the one thing that I noticed over and over and over again, that we've never actually been able to get to true zero touch as much as we've tried, and it's been for a bunch of reasons. And I guess what kind of made me latch onto this as a topic is just how much Apple and the MDM providers emphasize zero touch. And I understand that because it's a wonderful place to be because it reduces the amount of work. But just as I started working with it more and more and more, I mean, I've been working with, you know, thousands of devices over the years, and we've never gotten there. So it made me think, am I doing something wrong? Is there something wrong with the process? You know, it really got me thinking about it, and I wanted to share some of my thoughts on that. And I know that it's probably going to be maybe a little controversial in some cases, but otherwise, maybe not. It's just things we need to think about. So here's my posit. True zero touch, once again, noble goal. Have I ever been able to get there? Truly zero touch? Not really. So we do have to define, though, what zero touch really is. And I know that there's going to be people who are going to be watching this presentation going, we have zero touch in our place and it works great. And I don't know what you're talking about. And that's fine. And that's awesome. And I would love to talk with you. I would love to have you join in the conversation because I think there's a lot to be learned regarding this process. So as I say, let the controversy begin. So first step here, what is zero touch? And I think that we need to define zero touch before we move on. Now, zero touch enrollment, absolutely. It's very simple, very straightforward. It happens all the time, and I'm not talking about the enrollment part. Now, what's interesting from what I've seen is a lot of the MDM providers, when they talk about zero touch, they don't actually define what they mean by it. Yet, when I look at the Android information, kind of specifically Android stuff, they almost always define zero touch as meaning enrollment, not necessarily configuration. So somebody thought about that, and that's of interest to us. But what I'm saying is, let's concentrate now on the deployment side, because that's really where most of our gains are. So that when I'm talking zero touch, from this point on, I'm really going to be concentrating more on the deployment aspect and not the enrollment. So that it's, you start going through the process, it's going to get enrolled, and only after the enrollment can we start talking about the deployment, and that's really where the gains are. So that's what I'm talking about. All right. So let's talk about the reality of zero touch. But I'm also going to back up 1 second and explain. I've had way too much coffee today, and I'm going to try to draw this out. I don't want to do all this in 5 minutes, so let's just keep that in mind. But the reality. Also, oh, the other thing I need to apologize for, because I don't know that I could have done like a handout for this. There's a lot of text in the slides, and I despise slides with a lot of text, but I figure that if somebody wants to review this stuff, at least a lot of my thoughts are directly on the slide. So, just doing that. So the reality. This is what I ran into in a number of environments. And the environments that I typically work in find themselves or describe themselves as high touch, meaning that the IT groups want to provide a very smooth solution for their users. They do everything for them. I mean, even things that I'm kind of surprised that they provide, but that's good. That's fine. It allows the users to concentrate on just doing whatever their job is and not dealing with any of the IT stuff. So going a little deeper into that thought, that could mean, even though we might provide something in self-service, ultimately, if somebody asks for something, the IT groups are just as likely to do it for them rather than just simply say, oh, you can do that in self-service. So that's kind of the environments we're dealing with here. But I had one of these customers that called me in, paid my rate, for me to essentially set up dozens and dozens, actually, come think of it, hundreds of devices for them. And what I was doing was essentially just clicking buttons, so the users didn't have to. Now, this is after we'd already been through, and I say we, and myself and the IT staff of this one particular customer I'm kind of using as a basis, we had done an awful lot to achieve zero touch, but it became very apparent just how many buttons you still needed to click. I mean, we even went as far as logging into the various cloud services for the users. So they didn't have to. So everything is stored, or make sure that the single sign-on worked, because we didn't want to hand out machines that people had to do pretty much anything to do. The goal was just have it work when it made it into the user's hands. And on one hand, I'm sure that we could have gotten away with giving these devices to users and have them do some of this work, but that isn't what the company wanted for their users. But it also made me realize, as I was setting this up, the devices took hours before they were fully configured, because it just took time for files to come down. It took time for the MDM to check in and go, oh, it needs this now, it needs that now, it needs the next thing. And, could we have adapted things and made things a little bit smoother? Sure, without a doubt. But it was not a quick process. And thinking about it, if the user was doing this on their own, they'd have a device that potentially truly wasn't fully usable to them until hours went by. And that wasn't acceptable. All right. So why was this? And, well, part of it comes down to the planning. And as we looked at what we had, things became apparent. And not all applications could be made completely hands-off. Just wasn't anything that we were doing wrong. It was the software that needed hands-on use, manual generation of codes or application of codes. You had to go into, or once the application was installed, then you needed to go in, find that device in a console. This is mostly security stuff, sometimes some backup software. And there wasn't any way of automating it. And, or possibly there was a way of automating it, but it would have taken so much effort that you'd have to balance out that effort with, yeah, we'll just have somebody punch the buttons. And that's what we ended up doing. You know, it was like, it's not worth me or some other IT person trying to plan this all out when, yeah, if we're just doing this anyway, we'll hit the buttons and we'll have a better ROI on it. So yeah, so techniques and tools. So that was, do we have the ability to go zero touch across the board? Is it even possible? And if it isn't fully possible, do we change our approach and make it into a tool to minimize the amount of work that we need to do? And that's ultimately what we came up with. This is just going to be a tool to minimize the amount of work that we have to do in preparation to give these devices out to the users. And we made a balance of developing automations versus, yeah, we're just going to have to punch buttons for this. And we came up with what we felt was a reasonable balance. And this happens across all the customers that I work with. We're making these same decisions. So, you know, do we do something manually? Do we do something automated, semi-automated, whatever it is? Also, you have to look out for, do we change what software we're using? Because maybe we can find another piece of software that can be automated. But once again, that first piece of software was probably vetted because it met the needs of the company or the organization or the school, whatever it is. So are we simply going to change because it makes our lives easier as the IT staff? Does that make sense? Should we change a tool to make our lives easier? Maybe there's an opportunity for that. At the same time, providing everything that the users need. Sometimes it just didn't make sense to do it that way. You know, don't let the cart push the horse, essentially. And I do see that at times in this industry where we as IT folks sometimes will do things that make life a little bit easier for us. And sometimes that isn't really what we ought to be doing. It's our jobs to make tools available to the users, whether it's their phone, their software, their computers, whatever it is, access to data. And we really shouldn't be concerning ourselves with how much easier is my life if it's going to not also provide value to the end user. Every decision we make is, does this provide value to the end user? Only after we get past that, what can we do to make things easier for ourselves? Okay, so moving on, testing. We ran into issues that we hadn't really thought were going to be issues, and we found that we needed to make some tweaks, but this is standard deployment stuff. This isn't specific to it, but we needed to understand exactly how everything was going to happen, because we didn't want any surprises for the users. You know, we need to come up with, and when I say we, myself and whatever customer I'm working with, and you know, for you guys, whoever it is that you're working with, your end users, or if you're consultants, you got to make sure the testing procedure makes sense for what you're doing. But that's pretty standard. That's nothing new to you. What was surprising though was the listing there, environment impact, and what I meant by that was we found different behaviors based on where the deployment was happening. Network access primarily being the change. And the network access could be impacted by what the ISP connection was, speed, that's the obvious thing. But also, depending on where packages were coming from, where licensing servers were being reached out to, depending on what firewall rules were in place or not in place, we saw some very, very different behaviors. And if we were just sending devices out to users without having touched them ourselves, you know, the proverbial, they take it out of the shrink wrap and start working from there. One user could have a very, very different behavior than the next. And once we realized that, it was like, all right, we have to make sure we understand how these devices are going to behave depending on where they're at. So that was something that caught our attention. And then down into the preparation, it's really the sum of all of the pieces above. We needed to go through, and even if we were planning on sending out devices that the users were going to click their own buttons just because that's what made sense, we had to do some preparation. We had to prepare ourselves. We had to prepare the users for what was going on, let them know this is the situation, this is what you can expect, these are the things that you're going to see. So yeah, that was important. So the other thing that we noticed, well, specifically I noticed and passed on, when you're doing dozens or hundreds of devices, you're going to run into a few that are just ornery. They just don't do what you expect them to do. And you have to figure out, what are you going to do in those situations? And a lot of times, either we had to reset the devices back to factory defaults. In some cases, particularly with the computers, newer computers, I needed to go through and wipe out the drive and let the thing rebuild using the internet tools. What happened? I don't know. They were fresh out of a box and they just didn't work. And if we had shipped those devices out to the users and they ran into the same problems, what would you do? How would you handle that? Would you just have the users send it back? Would you try to run them through the fix? Granted, it was a very small percentage, but it happened enough that depending who ended up with those devices, if they decided not to work, could have been a big deal, So yeah, that was something that caught our attention, and also one of the catalysts for this presentation. So, all right, moving on. So the end result. This is what I see. We look at Zero Touch as a tool, as a work minimizer, as an efficiency builder, and not as it has to be a perfect end result. That literally somebody just opens up the lid to their brand new computer, that it came out of the shrink wrap, and in a certain amount of time, it is completely ready for them to go with nothing to do. The reality is, no. Somebody's going to have to do something. Somebody's going to have to log in. Somebody's going to have to agree to a EULA. Somebody is going to need to do something. It is not zero touch. It's a bad phrase. It is a almost zero touch, potentially zero touch, or we would love it to be zero touch, but it's hardly ever zero touch. Now that said, I have talked to some colleagues that said, "Oh yeah, we've got zero touch. I didn't have to do a thing. Did you need to log into this? Well, sure. Well, how about that? Yeah. Did you have to click that? Yeah. Did you go and add some printers from someplace else? Yeah. All right, so it wasn't zero touch. So it may be a semantic thing, but so be it. And we have to kind of separate out what zero touch is from a marketing standpoint and what zero touch really means to us. All right, so bingo. Yeah, I messed up the build in on that. Sorry. So my experience, I've already been repeating this, throughout, but in general, The high touch clients, no, because there's always going to be some touch. And we want to make sure that everything is working and that there isn't any issues and that somebody has put their eyeballs on it and the user is going to get a device that they can use right away with a minimum of effort and be happy with it. So we don't have to hear anything else from them because they're happy, they're doing their jobs. You know, no news is good news. Other customers, when we start going through what is it going to take to get to the zero touch, they go, we'll just touch it. That's fine. We don't see the need to spend the time that we're going to spend, particularly if they don't have a big IT group to put the effort into it. You know, they can hire somebody like me or, you know, get somebody, you know, in their group just to make sure that they have a process and they're happy with that. Now, I still push them to try to automate as much as possible. You know, maybe they're not going to get to a full zero touch, but every little bit helps. And that's what we need to do. We need to get to the point where it is the greatest balance that we can achieve. You know, I don't have a lot of time to go into specific processes. There's plenty of people that have been speaking about how they've achieved their automations. You know, of course, Jamf Nation is a wonderful place to go to learn. All of the MDM providers are providing forums and stuff where you can get information regarding the platform that you're using to figure out what's the most useful techniques for you. Really, what my goals are to have you think about what zero touch really means to you and your organization, what the balances are, and what it's going to do for you or not do for you. So that's what's important. So once again, I screwed up the build out because I'm terrible at slides. But down the road, as more and more automations become built into our tools, as the MDM providers recognize what it is that we need, and they're doing a great job of it, but hopefully, most important, is the software developers get on board and make these automations possible. That is probably my biggest frustration about this, is that you know, we've been able to get to, you know, 90–95% of automations, only to be stymied because some developer just couldn't be bothered to recognize that their software is going to be pushed out in an automated deployment environment, and that's just unacceptable in today's world. I don't get it. I just don't get it. But what this means is us as system administrators, or potentially people signing the check or signing the contract, need to go to these developers and say, listen, you need to do this, or I might have to pick another tool. And hopefully they do that. So if I give anybody some homework, it's do that. Contact the developers and say, help us out here. For some reason, Adobe just got into my mind, but even they got good. If Adobe can get good, anybody can get good. All right. So that's pretty much what I have to say. I want to leave some time for Q&A. You know, I hope that's a possibility. It looks like we've got a little less than 5 minutes left in this time period. So I think that's pretty much it, and I'll switch out of this screen. Is that good? All right.
Yep, that's great. Well, thank you very much, Ben, for that very informative presentation. We don't actually have much Q&A, but we do have a comment from Bruce that says,
okay,
that is exactly what we want to be able to do. No IT involvement, ship the system to off-campus faculty, and everything else from there is on them, which I can share in that regard, because that's the true meaning of zero touch. Like, we shouldn't have to intervene.
Correct. Yeah, and that's the important thing. And one of the things that drives me crazy with the virtual things, I really love having a room full of people so we can communicate together and be able to share information amongst ourselves. You know, so hopefully, you know, people can get a hold of me or join in on Slack and have these conversations, because it's important. And if people take only one thing away from this, is get on to the developers' feedback forums and tell them what you need so we can get better at this zero touch. We've learned for decades, the less the users have to do, the better, because the users are very, very clever at coming up with ways of making our lives more interesting. That's fine. It's our job to help them out.
Absolutely. One other comment that just came in is managing expectations can be key, which I think is a very good point to this.
Absolutely. Actually, I had that in one of my presenter's notes and I skipped right over that. But that is incredibly important. Let your users know what to expect. You're going to have to do this, 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 and this, and off you go. So the questions get made or get asked right up front, and they're ready to go, because really it's our job to enable these folks to do their jobs. So thank you, everybody.
Right. And thank you very much, Ben, for taking the time to deliver us today's first session. It was excellent, and I'm sure it's kind of gotten the wheels turning for a lot of us, and I'm sure we'll all be kind of talking about this in the future.